Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure being here. When Ana Rosa invited me, I was really happy, and more than that, I was honored for being here. So thank you, Ana. I also want to thank all the organizing staff, Camila, and many other people. I know that to organize such a big event like this takes a lot of work and needs a lot of people working behind. So thank you, everyone. I want to say thank you to Célio. He had a lot of work, I would say, to make this happen. And I must also thank Fernando Nogueira da Costa. Right now, I'm in a postdoctoral fellowship. He's my supervisor. And I want to say I'm sorry for my poor English. It has been a long time I don't speak English. And actually, since the COVID, this is my second real class. So I'm a little bit nervous right now.
The mic is not on.
It's not on?
No.
Sure? Hello?
I think it's not. But where's the?
Hello?
Where's our?
Hello? Now it's on?
I guess so, yeah.
Okay. So I'm not used with this. So I'm very proud of being here. 20 years ago, I was talking to Gary. We had met at the Post Keynesian seminar in Kansas City, and now I'm sitting here. So I try to do my best. So today I'm going to talk about complexity. My goal is to show that inflation and monetary policy transmission mechanism are complex phenomena. My presentation is divided into 5 parts. So I'm going to briefly talk about complexity theory. So I'm going to show some very basic concepts. Then I'm going to talk about inflation. I'll try to summarize what I call the heterodox post-Keynesian view and the orthodox monetarist view of inflation. And I'm going to try to show that the heterodox post-Keynesian view conceives inflation as a complex phenomenon. And I'm going to try to do the same with the monetary policy transmission mechanism. Then I'm going to give very brief methodological notes. I don't want to get into the math. It's Rosângela Bailini is here. She knows everything about that. I know just nothing. This is a new field for me. This is that's what I'm studying during my postdoctoral. And so I'll try to be as much intuitive as possible to show how we can apply this methodology to study inflation and the monetary policy transmission mechanism. And then I'm going to bring some conclusions. So, complexity theory, basic concepts. There is a basic definition: complex adaptive system. Complexity implies diversity through a large number of a large number and a wide variety of interdependent yet autonomous parts. So they are autonomous, but they are interdependent between each other. So that's the idea of complexity. Adaptive refers to the system's ability to change and to learn from past. And the system refers to a set of connected, interdependent parts. So hereafter, what we call complex adaptive system, I'm just called CAS. So CAS, there are a great number of CAS, and they do exist at very different scale. So cells are complex, are a CAS. Organs are a CAS. Organisms are a CAS. Gary is a CAS. I am a CAS. Everybody here is a CAS.
It's quite a catch.
So the community is a CAS, society is a CAS, and the economic agent is a CAS as well. The single market is a CAS, and the macroeconomic is a CAS in particular. So complexity theory deals with some common interrelated principle of CAS. So the idea is that those principles can be observed across all CAS. There are 6. Those are the most important, of course. So they are embedded and nested with other CAS. So they form what we call networks. They benefit from diversity. They exhibit distributed control rather than centralized control. This property is very important for inflation. They exhibit emergent outcomes and behaviors. Behaviors and outputs, they are non-linear and dependent on history, context, and on initial conditions. And finally, but not less importantly, CAS thrive at the edge of chaos. So cells, talking about the first property, the idea that CAS are embedded in nested. So a cell itself is a CAS, but it can act independently, but they can also congregate to self-organize to form more complex multicellular life. Individual human beings are CAS, and they also can congregate to and self-organize in the form of group of interest, if you want, and then they can form a community and also the macroeconomy. Benefit from diversity. Diversity of components is an essential part in providing a source of information, novelty, and innovation as the system evolves and adapts to its environment. For example, the role that biodiversity plays in the resilience and adaptability of forest ecosystems. Inflation benefit from diversity in this sense. New technology, they can create new fashions, which in its turn create new patterns of consumption, and suddenly there is a new pattern for the CPI. So inflation is a complex phenomenon, and inflation benefits from diversity in this sense. They exhibit distributed rather than centralized control. So the idea is that there is no central control. Control is distributed through the system, through its individual agent. So this allows the system to react and to adapt much faster than if there was a central control. So they have this capability to adapt to any change or to any exogenous shock, if you want. Chaos exhibited what we call an emergent outcome or behavior. So outcomes of chaos, they emerge from a process of self-organization rather than of external design and control. An emergent outcome results of the interaction and the synergies between individual agents. But it's really important to stress that it is different from the sum of the individuals. So Gutmann, I believe Gutmann, in this sense, see the international monetary system as a chaos, because you said a couple of times, at least yesterday, that the system, it is different from the sum of its parts. So because of that, the system results or outcomes cannot be predicted by studying the properties of the individual component alone. So it's the old idea that the macroeconomics logic is different from the microeconomic logic. Outputs are nonlinear and dependent on history, context, and on initial conditions. So the behavior is just nonlinear. It means that I've been doing a lot of I've been doing a lot of linear things, but it just doesn't work. I don't believe in this anymore. I mean, I'm not sure if I have ever believed, but that's okay. We must produce, right? We must publish. The idea is that those outcomes are highly dependent on its context, on history, and also on initial condition. That's the idea of path dependence that we are very familiar with. For example, the Brazilian contemporary inflation is totally different from the type of inflation we have experienced during the 1980s. It's a different animal. So I cannot analyze inflation right now with the same mind of the 80s. And finally, chaos thrives at edge of chaos. So the idea is that it's a system that thrives in areas of bounded instability and on the boundary between order and chaos. This is a basic dichotomy of this kind of system. So there is enough stability to have repetitive and predictive elements in the system, but just enough instability to generate a novelty without creating anarchy or dispersion. So the idea is that we have some periods of time where the system is stable, but suddenly there is a break or there is an exogenous shock like the COVID or I don't know, anything else. And the system change in a radical way. So those are the basic concepts of complexity theory. I'm going to do an effort to put all the inflation views of all the views of inflation into two very large groups. First one, I believe everyone is familiar here, is the so-called orthodox monetarist view. Those people believe inflation has a single cause. So inflation is very simple. Friedman said inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. In my opinion, he's wrong. And the idea is that since the classical theory or the quantity theory of money, they believe so. So Friedman model, or what Tobin called monetarism type 1, conceives inflation as a monetary phenomenon. Neoclassical economists, or the so-called monetarism type 2, also conceives inflation as a monetary phenomenon. New-Keynesian as well. And also, in a sense, fiscal fear of price level conceives inflation as a single cause phenomenon. There is only one cause. On the other hand, the post-Keynesian heterodox view believes that there are many or multiple causes behind inflation. And basically, not only demand pull inflation, but also cost pull inflation. And of course, I'm just quoting two basic references, Keynes and Davidson as well. But I could use much more references here, but this is not a course on, this is not a lecture on inflation. So very briefly, classical economics arise in the money stock, causes only a rise in price level. Money neutrality, both in long and in short run. There are two fundamental hypotheses. The economy is at full employment level, and the velocity of money is fixed. Friedman, how can I say, he did a very superficial change on that view. And he kept the idea that the economy is always, not always, but in the long run, the economy is at full employment. So that's the idea behind the natural rate hypothesis. So according to Friedman, in the short run, since the expectations are adaptive, the economy might be out of full employment or out of the natural rate of unemployment, but in the long run, it will always be there. So inflation is a monetary phenomenon in this sense over the long run. Neoclassical, they keep the same hypothesis. they keep the natural rate of unemployment hypothesis. Yes, of course, there was a revolution, the so-called rational expectation revolution, but in terms of monetary policy making, the result is the same. Money neutrality in the long run. So it's amazing how a very strange idea, in my opinion, can last for so much long time. And if you go to New Keynesian, the same. Inflation is mostly a demand pull phenomenon. Yes, of course, I'm trying to be comprehensive, and I'm doing a lot of simplifications here. But they have some room for cost-push inflation, but they don't care much about it. They just don't care. So, and they keep the idea of full employment, the so-called NIRO. It's the same thing. And they keep the rational expectation idea. So, in my idea, I believe that there is nothing new. What they have bring, what novelty they brought to us. In my idea, they did a regression because they changed macro into micro. Those models are microeconomic models. And now comes the fiscal fear of price level. Money is caused by budget, is caused by budget deficit over the long run. So it would be funny if it wasn't so dramatic, because everybody believed that. And we are a very small group of people. So I'm very glad to see young people interested in studying heterodox economics. I was very motivated by Jay's talk yesterday. So because I believe we have a great job here. We have a lot of things to do. We have a lot of minds to change. And so that's the basic idea. Inflation, they promote a reductionism. Since inflation is single cause, it's very easy to control inflation. So you should just adopt a single fixed rule. Friedman proposed a monetary rule, a so-called monetary targeting regime. In classical economics, there is no room for monetary policy. They are at the nirvana. There is full employment. So why using monetary policy? It's a full flexible model. There is perfect competition. Prices are perfectly flexible. There is capital and labor mobility. It's an illusion. And then the new classical and new Keynesian, they propose a simple rule, inflation targeted regime. And the fiscal theory, another rule. Oh my God, the macroeconomy is complex. So how are we going to do with a complex problem, adopting a single rule? It's not going to work. There's no way. Now we come to the heterodox view. Keynes, he did a great work showing that inflation is not necessarily a monetary phenomenon. It might even be only under very specific circumstances. The idea that, I'm sorry, there is a problem with the equation here. But if Keynes said that if the money stock is raised and the velocity is fixed, and if the economy is at full employment, this might cause a rise in the price level. But this is only a theoretical possibility, right? Because we know that money velocity is not fixed, and we know that the economies almost never are at full employment. I don't want to go through these. I just put some equations, but this is the famous decomposition of the quantity equation by Keynes, and he shows how complex what we call the transmission mechanism of monetary policy, because very simply here, or very briefly, arises in monetary stock if is not absorbed by a rise in money demand, is going to be transmitted to demand, aggregate demand. And if the economy is at full employment, this will generate a rise in price level, but only under those very specific and rare conditions. And so then this is the decomposition of the quantity theory. I don't want to go on to this, but he shows every single possibility. So Keynes conceives inflation as a complex phenomenon. He just didn't use the term. Of course, there wasn't the theory yet, so he couldn't do this. Oops. Davidson is more specific. He says that there are multiple causes for inflation. So he grouped the different types of inflation into two large groups. Mostly of them are cost push. So you can have profit inflation, decreasing returns inflation, tax inflation, importer inflation, and supply shock inflation. And in the other group, you may have a demand pull inflation resulting from a demand shock, but only when the economy is in full employment. That's what Keynes called true inflation, right? I don't think I should spend many time here, but I'll try to very briefly explain each type of inflation. So the salary inflation occurs when there's a rise in the nominal wage. But this kind of inflation might be compensated by a productive gain. So it's not that simple, right? Profit inflation, it depends on market structure and also on competition patterns. So if you have a competitive market, it's one thing, but if you have a monopoly or a oligopoly, it's more likely to have profit inflation. So there's no simple rule of inflation. Imported inflation depends on the degree of openness of the economy. The more open is the economy, like the Brazilian, the more relevant is the imported inflation. Supply shocks occurs when there is a food or energy shortage, like the Croatian War right now, or the oil shocks in the late 1970s. There are also tax inflation and decreasing returns. They are both, they are all cost push inflation. So the idea is that in this sense, inflation is complex. There is no single type of inflation as the mainstream orthodox view believe. Now, let's talk a little bit about monetary policy transmission mechanism. I'll give two definitions. We call the transmission mechanism the process through which monetary policy affects the economy as a whole and the price level in particular. The idea is that there is a long chain. It's a process. In a very simple way, the idea, so let's think about an inflation targeting central bank, like the Brazilian central bank or the European central bank. In Brazil, we call the base rate or the overnight rate Selic. So Selic is equivalent to Fed fund rate. And in Brazil, we call the CPI inflation IPC. So the basic idea is that right now we are in a process of increasing Selic because Brazilian central bank believes that this is going to reduce inflation. This is a very simple way to show the transmission mechanism. I'm going to see a more complex. I'm going to show a more complex picture of it, of course. The transmission mechanism has what we may call a power, or I might define the efficacy of the monetary policy. The efficacy of monetary policy is just the sensibility, the Selic IPCA sensibility. So the idea is that IPCA is a function, is a negative function of Selic, and alpha, I may call alpha the sensibility. How do I call derivada in English? Derivative. So it's the derivative. Okay, so it's the IPCA derivative in relation to Selic. Okay, I can measure that in a sense, or I can at least theoretically measure that. And most central banks believe that alpha is negative. So they rise, when they rise their base rate, they are expecting a fall in price level. Once again, two large groups, heterodox monetarist view and the heterodox view. Orthodox, since inflation is very simple, transmission mechanism of monetary policy is very simple for them. So they assume a hypothesis, or someone call it a result, the famous money neutrality. So the idea is that aggregate supply is exogenous to monetary policy, and this is the classical dichotomy. In this sense, inflation is mostly demand pull, and they ignores or at least minimizes the relevance of cost push inflation. And this view is shared by major central banks, Fed, Bank of England, European Central Bank, Bank of Japan, and the Brazilian Central Bank. If you read the inflation report #1, they say explicitly, inflation, money is neutral in the long run. So when you adopt the inflation targeting regime, you are adopting a model. This is very important to emphasize. The inflation targeting regime is not just a framework. There is a whole theory behind it, and we must stress that. So there are basic 5 channels through which a shock in monetary condition are going to affect prices. The two first, interest rate and credit, affect investment. There is the expectation channel, the asset price channel, and the exchange rates channel. The heterodox Post Keynesian view has a more complex framework, or see a more complex picture of the thing, because they introduce 2 new channels: the exchange rate cost channel and the interest rate cost channel. I'm going to talk a little bit about both. The idea of the exchange rate cost channel might be called the imported inflation. So this is based on imported inflation. So when the central bank raises Selic rate, the interest rates on domestic assets goes up. This is going to bring capital inflow. Real is going to appreciate, and thus we are going to experience a reduction in cost of imported inputs and capital goods. So there is a reduction in total cost, and depending on market structure, Norbert is here. We have been talking a lot of it, and we have a paper that is on the reading list for this lecture, in which we stress the relevance of the market structure and or the competition patterns in the transmission of cost shocks to prices. So the idea is that this type of inflation is very important in small open economies as Brazil, as I just said. The interest rate cost has the opposite sign. It's very important to stress that. The idea is that firms takes credit to produce, and when the central bank raises its rate, it's going to increase the financial cost. And once again, depending on market structure and on competition pattern, this raising in cost might be passed on to prices, to final prices. So this is a channel which goes into the opposite direction, right? It's important to emphasize that. Orthodox economists, when they estimate a VAR model, and when they saw that in response to a shock in the overnight rate, the price level initially goes up, and only after it goes down, they call it price puzzle. But it's not puzzling for us, because we know that there are financial costs. And depending on the relevance of those financial costs, the power or the efficacy of monetary policy is going to be lower, because I have a channel that is working in the opposite direction of the expected by the central bank. So it's not puzzling for me. It might be puzzle for them, but not for us. So this is a framework. If you go to Brazilian Central Bank presents a framework like this, but they only show the black box, not the red. They only focus on demand pull inflation. So the contribution I'm bringing here is to introduce those two channels, the interest rate cost push and the exchange rate cost push channel. I'm sorry, I didn't have time to translate this one. But even the orthodox view, they ignore the relevance of market structure or the competition pattern on the transmission of shocks, both of demand shocks and supply shocks to prices. Because the market structure or the competition pattern, they do play a role in the transmission, not only of the cost push inflation. This is more obvious, I think, but a shock, a demand shock might be passed on to prices in a more strong or in a more or less strong way, depending on those factors. So that's what we are trying to highlight here. And I remember, Norberto, you were at the Oikos paper. Yeah, with Camila. And it was 2002? 2002?
No.
2012. Yeah, 10 years ago. So I've been thinking about it for a long time. And it's and since I view it as a complex phenomenon, I need a group. I cannot do this work by myself, because I know a little about macro, but I know nothing about micro. I don't know industrial organization anymore. I have studied it, but a long time ago. So I need a team. And I like to work with colleagues. And if I could give an advice to you, young scholars, grouping to work together. It's very important to work together. I'm going to mention the complex network group that I'm working with right now by the end. How long I've been talking? How long? What? Half an hour. So I still have time, right? How many? Can I speak for more? 20, 25?
We don't have much time for questions, but yes.
I try to go faster. So the idea is that there's no simple role. Market structure and competition patterns do play a relevant role in transmission mechanism, and different types of inflation must be controlled by different fiscal and also monetary policy, and not only by raising the overnight rate. So the idea is that fiscal policy is a relevant element of inflation control. Right now, for instance, we are facing a food inflation in Brazil, not only in Brazil, but particularly in Brazil. Price of food is raising so fast, and we don't have a, we call it CONABI, and I forgot the name of, but the não, em português não, mas a ideia é da política de segurança alimentar. Como que eu vou traduzir isso? Isso é bem inglês.
Food security.
Yeah, for instance, food security is a way to control inflation. The US does that. Europe does that. But Brazil stopped doing since then. So it's a fiscal way to prevent inflation, food inflation. You must have security, food security policy. So I could give many examples. Now I'm just about to finish. This is the shortest part of my presentation. So now I'm going to try to bring some methodological notes on network theory. Two concepts, nodes and vertices. This figure, this chart, is what we call a direct graph with 8 vertices and 5 nodes. So I have I believe you guys cannot read, but this node I call A. Here is node B, and C, D, and E. So I have 5 nodes. Those nodes are linked by vertices. So the idea is that there is a relationship that goes from A to B. That's why we call it a direct graph. And then B goes to C, E goes to D, and so on. I don't want to spend much time with this. And as I said, I'm just trying to be as much intuitive as possible. Now let's see an application of it. I'm sorry, it's too small, but this is the decomposition of IPCA. So each node is a group: food, energy, transportation, and so on. And so those are, each node are the different groups of inflation, CPI inflation, if you want. And the vertices shows the correlation between each group. This is might not be very comprehensive, but maybe this graph, okay, I just said that, right? But I have another chart that might be a little bit intuitive. I'm sorry, it's, the quality, can you read? So this is, I'm showing the correlation between IPCA components. So the length of the vertex represents the size of the correlation. So I can't read, but this is health. First we can see in the very middle is food. So what does this figure shows? First, the centrality of food. This is an expected result, since food is a universal cause. So when I have a food inflation, I should expect it to spread to all other components of CPI. So this is what we call a measure of centrality. And Rosangela knows everything about it again. And she's gonna teach me, I hope so. And there are, and once again, the length is the size, or it is the size of the correlation. So this correlation, those two groups here, which is health and food, has a larger correlation, or a bigger correlation than, let me see, services and food. Okay, and so on. There are only two negative correlations. The red one, not intuitive, not expected. But those two items, they are administrator prices. So it can be anything because they are formed by contract. So there is no logic, right? It's a political decision. So here's another example, I believe, more intuitive. And I think it shows how powerful these what we call it, I didn't put the name. It's the minimum spanning tree. It's a very powerful tool for analyzing inflation. I'm almost done. So there will be time for questions. I never thought I would quote Sargent. Never. I never thought. And I am in crisis. I was in crisis. I thought, oh my God, am I going to quote Sargent? But what can I do? He's on the frontier of the thing. So there is, he has this open book. He's always updating this book. And it's a very formal group, of course, as everything Sargent has done. But it's a manual that everything is there, and he shows a lot of applications of the complex network theory. So according to him, in economics, network theory is typically taught as a specialized subfield available to students as one of many elective courses towards the end of their program. However, we are rapidly approaching the stage where every aspiring scientist, including social scientists and economists, wants to know the foundations of the field. So that's the only thing that I agree with him, right? I hate it. I don't agree with his past work, but that's it. It's a methodology, so he's doing a good job on it. And so, just the conclusion. Cells are complex, organs are complex, human being is complex, society is complex, and life is complex. Thus, the macroeconomy is also complex. There's no way. So, accordingly, complex theory is the road for a better understanding of the macroeconomic phenomenon. And I'm going to stop here. Thank you. I'll go to the questions, but I have to do some merchandising here. This is my the research group I coordinate. There is a QR code. You have a weekly column at Carta Capital. We need contributors to this, so I'm asking for help. Who wanna write a small opinion paper article? Please send me. And I must say thank you to some colleagues. Clayton Costa, who is right now working very close to me. He's teaching me network theory and neural network. Fernando Nogueira, João Sitsu, and Norberto Montani Martins, who is here, long time friend, long time colleague. And I must also talk a little bit about the networks study group formed by Clayton da Costa, Rosângela Bailini, Ari Barradas, Débora Pimentel, and Felipe Leite. So it's a lab. We work as a lab. And I believe that we must work like this. And finally, there will come, it's coming, an electronic version of the book. So I'm very glad it's almost done. So in a few weeks, I believe it will be available online. So thank you very much. And I believe.
Thank you. I have a number of. Yes, you will take it. We're going to do this presentation. Como é que você quer responder?
Uma de cada vez.
Yes, he's going to answer once for this time, so you can start.
Thank you. I have a number of comments. You mentioned many times exogenous shocks. I think that we should stop thinking in terms of exogenous shocks. Think that in a complex system, everything is endogenous. COVID was an endogenous phenomenon. Second, inflation. I like Paul, and I've known Paul for 30 years. But I think the Post Keynesians have gone way beyond seeing inflation as demand versus cost. Post Keynesians today see inflation as a result of consumer, both at the international level, of domestic level, firm level, industry level. So I don't think we gain anything from looking at cost versus demand. It's all conflicting. When it comes to Keynes, I think we have to stop quoting Keynes, especially when it comes to money. Keynes was too orthodox, even in the general theory. A little bit better than treatment on money, but still a little bit, too conventional. Caldor has a great quote where he says, the bastard Keynesianism, the founder, the creator of bastard Keynesianism was Keynes. So, anyways, when I returned, when you mentioned, well, maybe just demand pull inflation at full employment. The U.S. is at full employment, and current inflation in the United States is not caused by demand. So again, you can look at that in terms of conflicting claims. You mentioned the new Keynesians. I've got no problems with freedom and launchers, but the new Keynesians don't speak in terms of money supply anymore. Nobody does. It's all interest rates. They've abandoned discussions of money supply. And even you had a graph when you talk about Selig and you go, increase the money supply leads to a decrease money supply leads to an increase in, I think that you can just abandon reference to the money supply completely. I agree when you said that fiscal policy can be used with monetary policy, but monetary policy is clumsy and not very effective in dealing with inflation. So I would just say abandon monetary policy because you've told us everything that's wrong about it. So let's stop talking of monetary policy when it comes to inflation and let's think of fiscal policy. And one area where I would like to see something is on green energy. If you want to fight inflation as a result of energy costs, you have to invest in green energy. So the whole discussion of environmental issues comes in, climate change comes into a great discussion of inflation.
Thank you. First comment, yes, of course. Exogenous shocks is maybe a vicious, right? In a complex system, everything is endogenous. You're definitely right. Inflation as a result of conflict. Yeah, it's. I took an option, right? I did a very. I had too much little time to talk about too much theory, right? So yes, of course, the conflict, the claim conflict is so relevant, but but it's not my focus here. Okay, it's not a lecture on inflation, and but maybe I disagree with you. I like to see things as supply and demand. I like the diagram, aggregate demand and supply demand. So it's an option. I can see the claim conflict as a supply demand, as a demand pool inflation in a sense. I don't want to get lost in definitions, right? So what I'm trying to say is that I agree with you. Conflict is important, definitely. Stop quoting Keynes. It's an option. Okay, it's an option. Keynes is the founder. So if I have to quote two people, I did make a choice. Okay, but I know there are a lot of other more updated work that I could quote, but I didn't. US is at full employment, and you said something about that. I'm sorry, it was really fast, but it's something, I believe that you said that inflation right now at the US is mostly a supply phenomenon, right? Is that correct? Yeah, I agree with you, but theoretically, there might be a demand pull phenomenon if economy is at full employment, in my view. So
what good is the theory if it's not supporting the theory?
We are talking about one case, and I'm trying to be as general as possible, okay? So when you do a theory, you try to be as general as possible. And my goal here is to show that everything is possible in this sense. There are multiple causes for inflation, and I don't like to put anyone aside. So that's if you see this conclusion, the idea is that different types of inflation must be controlled by different policies. So it's a case. I must analyze a specific case. And I'm sorry, I don't know the US economy as well as you might know. So I can talk about the Brazilian economy. We are definitely not at full employment. So right now, there is no demand pull inflation in Brazil, but theoretically, there might be. I don't know. So I believe that we agree, right? I believe that, okay. So we disagree. I might learn a little bit more about U.S. inflation, but my goal is not to talk about U.S. inflation. I'm talking about inflation in general through the history. So basically, New Keynesian, they don't talk about monetary. Yes, of course, but they don't talk about monetary control. Yes, sure, they do not. But in a sense, inflation is a monetary phenomenon, in my view.
Maybe we look at questions from some of the students.
Okay, perfect.
I have one. Just have one other one, I think.
Oh, is there just one?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, if you can.
Então deixa eu só terminar. Oh, the green energy. Yes, I truly agree with you. It's a way to control this type of inflation, which is worldwide, right? So green energy. Yeah, I believe Ana Rosa is working with something like this, right?
Finance, no?
Yeah. So, but it's not I'm not dealing with it, so I couldn't go further on it. And monetary policy should be abundant. Yeah, I believe that. I agree with you, but it might has a role. I mean, there is too much emphasis on monetary policy. And I agree with you that fiscal policy is the right policy. But I wouldn't say that monetary policy should be abandoned, because we must define, central bank must define the interest rate. So it must be a theory behind that. Okay, so I wouldn't say that. I'm not sure what did you exactly mean by that, but I believe that monetary policy must be very stable and predictable, as stable and as predictable as possible. So I agree if you mention that by using the term abandon. Okay, thank you so much for your comment.
First, I think the two lectures from today, they complement each other, right? And in a very interesting manner, because I think that politics is the central argument of the whole process of inflation throughout history since the first financial crisis emerged. And I want to talk about inflation in the US because as the hegemon nowadays, I think it's the main example of how the inflation process is unfolding nowadays. I was just checking the MI3 aggregates in Fred, and we can see that basically the problem appears to be a supply problem, but it's not actually. It's a very important problem of definition of goals and the participation of the international order in organizing development, not just in a monetary or fiscal way, separated, but together. So when we have like infrastructure plans being, laid out, publicized, at the same time they say, you're gonna invest billions. and trillions of dollars or equivalents in other countries. But at the same time, are those things being made on time? I think that's the main question that we are facing here is, do we have time to reach the goal that we are setting? And that's the interest rate in reality, not just for me. I think that's what we can achieve actually. And Professor Simon talked very important about reassuring and expectations. I think we need to think about expectations. If we don't think about expectations, and we are seeing very bad expectations here, we won't reach equilibrium. And we are not talking about monetary equilibrium. Milton Friedman was a liar, actually. That's the main conclusion we can get here. Is that Milton Friedman was basically a liar. He lied even about the help he gave to the military dictatorships in Chile. He lied about many things, and saying it's just a monetary phenomenon and making some graphs is a big lie. And I think we gotta seek stability and define what is stability and what is freedom. And then political arguments and political central arguments, so we can define the interest rates and define harmony between countries, and then we can reach the multipolar order that Professor Gutman was talking yesterday. So this is my comment. I think Professor, your lecture is just very important. I need to talk later. And also the third group, there we need to reunite because this is basically our thing, right? So we need to get together like right now in the lunch time.
What's your name again?
It's Leonardo.
Oh, Leonardo. Oh, thank you for your comments. And yeah, I agree with you when you said that politics is important. I have two majors, one in economics and another one in social science. And I have a field, I would say a minor in political science. So I believe that the interest groups, they play very relevant in setting the macro policy. Once again, Norberto was one of the co-authors of a paper that we use the concept of convention to explain why the Brazilian base interest rate is so high. So we go back to Keynes, we use some, Gutman is here, the French conventionalist theory to explain why the Brazilian interest rate is so high. So, and I believe that if you see inflation as a complex phenomenon, and also the transmission mechanism of monetary policy as a complex phenomenon, you must bring into politics. So thank you. I agree with you, definitely.
Professor, thank you for your lecture, and I look forward to reading more of your work from here on. I just have a very quick curiosity, something I'm interested in what is the minimum spanning fee that you showed.
Okay,
It might be a language question that I just didn't see where it is, but I'm curious where fuel is in the map. Fuel, oil, gas.
Combustível vai estar em energia, acho energia. This is transportation. So it's here, And energy, not here? It must be here. Oh.
Transport.
Transportation.
Because you know you can open the CPI is an aggregate item, right? So there are many levels of aggregation. So
It's not here.
it's not here. So but you can see fuel here. Okay.
Maybe transportation or motor.
Oh, sure. Maybe they are here. Because they are administrated. They are administrated. Okay? He's here. Because this is a large set of prices. There is oil, gas, energy, and some other, a lot of taxes. They are grouped here. So I would have to, what's your name again? Christine. To ask your question, I need to go to a lower level of aggregation, right? But I can definitely do that. Okay.
Thanks, Professor.
Thank you for your question.
You have another there,
Please.
Thank you for the presentation. A question more on the methodology. We would generally, when we look at the position of the policy, the assumption of the reality and the assumption of the genuinity of the market the policy shocks, which are done out of convenience. And I mean, imposing this a bit of theory, a bit of structural model, allows us to have an idea of how monetary policy on the price level. So I wonder, looking at inflation and monetary policy as a conference now, I mean, how change this? If it's only about, is it only about decomposing the price level into the different components and see how they interact? Or is there a way in which using, looking at inflation as a complex phenomenon, we can understand better the condition of the policy? I mean, how do methodologically we use the issue of complexity for understanding the condition?
Okay, what's your name again?
Jonathan.
Giacomo. Thank you for your question, Giacomo. A couple of things. It's in the theoretical level, for me, everything might cause inflation. Okay, so if one people say it's only cost push, it's wrong, because it can be demand pull in some cases. Okay, so I'm open. I must see a specific case, I must study this specific case, and then I'm gonna have a diagnosis. Okay, and then and when I figure out what type of inflation is, and there will be a set of types, not only one. So that's the idea of complexity, right? And then I'm gonna have a set of a whole different policies. Most fiscal, of course, I agree with Sean. Fiscal policy is the tool to fight inflation. Planning, we must talk about economic planning again, right? So that's a way to prevent inflation. So this is in the theoretical level, okay? Methodologically, it's a much more powerful and accurate tool than linear models. I can use neural network to model inflation. And I believe neural networks are much more powerful than VAR model. VAR, if you see exchange rates, Brazilian exchange rate series, there are so many structural breaks. I cannot use a VAR to do that, you know? So I believe, even though I've done that a lot, okay? I've done that 10 years ago, I don't know, a long time, I forget it. I'm not gonna do it anymore. And that's why I put a lot of hope in this study group, you know, and I am not able to do it by myself. That's the thing. The knowledge is collective, you know. I don't learn alone. I can study alone, but I need a professor, I need a colleague, I need a co-author, and I need a lot of people working together. So that's the idea. If you are dealing with a complex phenomenon, you need many people from many different fields. So so empirically, there is a difference. I work in a lab. So it's a whole different thing. It's not, I doesn't work as I worked 10 years ago, like by myself or only with another person, another macroeconomic theorist. I need a mathematician. I need an statistician. I need many other, many different fields of knowledge to understand this complex phenomenon. That's the idea. I'm sure if I did answer you. Thank you.
I think that should be the last one, okay? Anyone? So, hold on, please.
Hi, my name is Guilherme. I'm PG student here at Unicamp. I was wondering, is it possible to model with an agent-based model the inflation? So we can like try to understand what the agents are doing and then try to see the pattern that it makes in macro level.
You are asking me if I might consider the agent-based model a complex way to approach?
Yes, to use to try to understand inflation. So you can use the micro level, try to understand what's leading the agents to raise the prices and how these propagate in the system and what's the result in the macro level.
Yes and no. In a sense, it's a more complex approach to macro, right? So instead of having only one representative agent, you have many different types of agents. But it's not the type of tool that I'm willing to use. Again, I'm willing to use complex network theory and neural network theory. It's a whole different world. They don't talk. So I know very little about neural network, but you know the inputs, you know the output, but there is a black box. There is a function, and the function is an algorithm, and it's learning. It's learning from experience. So it's a whole different approach. Okay. I'm sorry if it also, to make it very clear, I like the work of people who is doing agent-based model, but I'm searching another way to go there, and maybe it's more accurate way, maybe not. I'm not sure. I'm still learning. And there is one thing, I was just talking to Rosangela. Nobody is applying this methodology to macro. It has been applied to micro phenomena, but not to macro. So I believe there are a lot of opportunities here. And I really believe in that paper. We must write it. Did I answer you? Yes, right. Thank you.
We could have one more.
Could have-
Yes, the next one.
My name is Diogo, thank you for the presentation. What was you talk at the end about theoretically that everything can happen? And there's a lot of different concepts. So, but it sounds to me like if we are saying that there's no theory at all, because if we can say that theoretically there's a lot of causes and each case has its own comprehension. So I try really to think what would be theory in this kind of approach, in this sense, and that we don't have. I know that's not simple to have different causes and try to make to build a whole comprehension with so different causes and effects. But to say that we have to look at each case sounds to me that if we are not really able to build a different theory to do with this kind of object, inflation or whatever else. I don't know if it's clear.
What's your name again? Diogo. Thank you, Diogo. Yeah, everything can happen. It's a strange phrase for who's giving a lecture, right? Because it's
Stop for
because but there is a theory. There is a theory. I have presented a theory. I have presented the idea that under very specific and rare condition, there might be demand pull inflation. I have stressed that there are many different types of cost push inflation and I also stressed that inflation is mostly cost push inflation. I agree with Rochon that the conflict is an important element of inflation. So there's a theory, and this diagram is a framework, is a way to it's a synthesis of the theory. The idea is that there are many different channels through which monetary policy affects inflation, and you might forget monetary policy, but in a sense, but each channel has an impact on demand and again, depending on market structure and competition pattern, a shift in demand is going to have a different impact on inflation. So there is a theory, but the theory is wide open. And what I'm fighting against for a long time is this reductionism. Is this view that we must adopt a rule, that we must adopt a regime. No, this is wrong. There is no recipe. There is no easy answer. Okay? The world is complex. What can I do? It's complex. So I must study the case. I must know the history of the country. You know, the inflation in Brazil is a different animal from inflation in the US. And I don't know the US. I know a little bit about Brazil, so I'm comfortable to talk about the Brazilian inflation, but I'm not comfortable to talk about inflation in the US. Of course, if you ask my opinion, I'm going to give you an opinion, but so superficial. Okay, it's not well informed. So I must, once again, I did study a lot of Brazilian history, a lot of sociology, a lot of political science. I studied a lot of math, a lot of things to understand this complex phenomenon. Okay, and I'm very convinced about it. I really. Thank you.
Can finish, okay? So, thank you, Professor.